Talk 1240.
Folks over at Tesla seem to have an interesting idea for the future. This is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a lot more. Now, Tesla, of course, is the motor company, although it's not really it's a motor company, but it's not an engine company. It's a company that deals with electric cars. It's sort of pioneering the electric car market right now, and it's being spearheaded by the CEO, Elon Musk, who's a former PayPal executive, and now he works over at Tesla. In fact, he founded Tesla and SpaceX. So this guy obviously has a vision for the future, I guess. He's also working on Hyperloop, which is a topic for another day. So this comes from BGR and saying that we've all been there before. You're driving down the street, minding your own business, when a terrorist unleashes a deadly mutated strain of smallpox into the air, or anthrax like we had in the early 2000s. So what do you do in that situation? Well, if you happen to be one of the very few people who are driving a Tesla Model X, all you got to do is press a button that says bioweapon defense mode, and it'll hermetically seal your car with filtered air, and you'll be able to, presumably anyway, escape without danger, and you won't contract anthrax poisoning, and you probably won't get smallpox, and you won't die a terrible, painful death of Ebola or something like that. That's the idea anyway. So during last night's big Tesla Model X unveiling, Tesla CEO Elon Musk explained that pressing the bioweapon defense mode button would turn on the car's air filter and deliver interior air quality, what he calls on the levels of a hospital room. Now, I don't know about you, but I've been to a few hospital rooms, and the air quality didn't seem to be that great, but maybe he knows a little bit more about hospital rooms than I do. On its official Model X page, Tesla says that the car features a medical-grade hermetic sealed, or actually a HEPA filter strip, that filters outside air from pollen, bacteria, viruses, and pollution before circulating into the cabin. So basically, you could think of it as like a giant gas mask for your car. Essentially, that's what it's doing. It's running it through like a NATO filter type deal so that you don't, die of smallpox due to these particulates getting into the cabin of your car. Tesla has shown that it's not above adding ridiculous sounding features that sound like they come straight out of a sci-fi movie. The past summer, for instance, it added a feature called ludicrous mode to its Model S cars that allowed them to go to 0 to 60 miles per hour in only 2.8 seconds. Yeah, that's pretty dang fast, but also it's pretty dang inefficient, so the battery probably wears out pretty quickly if you ever happen to actually use ludicrous mode. There's raising now questions, though, about electric cars. Now, the interesting thing about the Tesla cars is that it's all electric, so it's a very digitized car. There are a lot of interesting features about Tesla cars, one of which, of course, is the direct drive system. There's not really any sort of transmission to speak of. It just sort of it goes. And that being the case, you get pretty fast acceleration and really nice 0 to 60 speeds. So again, that being the case, it's not bad as a sports type car, interestingly enough. So it's interesting to see how people are sort of migrating over to that sort of system as opposed to the standard 5-speed manual or automatic transmission that we're all used to. So it's interesting how these electric cars are becoming a viable option, and they're not terrible. That's the fun thing about them, is that they're really not terrible. They're also not particularly affordable at the moment. It's not really easy to charge them at the moment. There's not really a fast charging system or anything like that. There's not a hot swappable battery system or even a cold swappable battery system at the moment. So there's not really a whole lot of incentive to buy an electric car right now. But sometime in the future, say when we have hydrogen fuel cells or something along those lines, that could actually be a rather nice option as opposed to internal combustion engine cars that we've all been using for the last 100-something years. It's funny, too, how cars have changed quite a lot, not even just in the last 20 years, but in the last 5 years. There are a lot of new electrical components, a lot of new computer controllers that are ensuring that we're having highly efficient engines and cars that are running at the optimal temperatures and all sorts of different things that are controlling how the car operates that changes our driving experience. And it's also part of why the American muscle car, for the most part, is kind of dead. because those engines are so inefficient, they're so dirty, and they really actually don't go that fast, is the weird thing compared to some even just regular consumer grade engines. Back in the 1960s, they go, man, this car will go 80 miles per hour. Like, okay, my Honda Civic will go 80 miles per hour. So it's kind of it's a weird thing to think about. It seemed really fast back then, but then again, everyone can do that now. So it's kind of weird. But then again, you don't really get the loudness and the vroom vroom and the testosterone and all that sort of thing with a Prius or anything like that. So I don't know. It's an interesting trade-off, though. Nevertheless, it's interesting to see how this is evolving over time. Well, on that topic, of course, we all know what we're going to get into, which is Volkswagen. Volkswagen is in a bit of trouble, to say the least. In fact, you would not be incorrect in saying that Volkswagen is in some deep, substances right about now. Tesla is really not factoring in at the moment, although it would be funny if Tesla managed to buy Volkswagen. That would be an interesting move. But no, what we're having right now is this whole big scandal with Volkswagen and the emissions testing, where it still seems that there are computer controls on these Volkswagen cars, which are designed to evade EPA standards testing. Now, that's a little bit shady, to say the least. It's also kind of illegal, if you were to ask the EPA. But then again, it's really not that big of a deal environmentally. People talk about, it's the most inefficient thing, and it's going to be spewing carbon emissions all over the place. But actually, when you think about it, these engines are so efficient already, even without some of these computer controls, we probably wouldn't see a whole lot of difference. I mean, considering also that there are diesel ships that put out more emissions than any of these cars combined just on one trip across the Atlantic. So it's really probably not making a whole lot of difference in the long run. That's kind of the weird thing about it. But of course, the big issue really isn't the fact that there might be heightened emissions. The real issue is the fact that, or at least the allegation, I should say, is not proven, the allegation that Volkswagen lied to the government. So that's the big story. Because really, the whole emissions thing isn't a big deal. The big deal is actually the question of, did Volkswagen lie to the government? Because that's far more damning than anything that could come from any sort of emissions scandal in and of itself. That's really not the scandal. The scandal is the truthfulness of this particular company. Because keep in mind, a corporation, is essentially a government-created entity. It's unfortunate, but that really is the case. It's invented with the permission of the government. Now, if you were a private actor, it would be a little bit different. Keep in mind, too, why do most people form a corporation? Well, let's think of it in the terms of an LLC, limited liability corporation. Liability being the key word there. You would create a corporation in order to escape from liability. It's a separation so that you personally can't be sued for the actions of this particular company. Now, there are benefits and there are hazards to doing it that way, but that is how it's done. And that's one reason for forming an LLC or a company of any sort. So most of the people who are working at VW are not going to see any sort of flack from the EPA. Nobody's going to know their names. Really, the only person who's coming under fire right now is the former CEO, Winterkorn. And really, the only reason Winterkorn is coming under scrutiny is because he was the CEO. So he's the one guy you can sort of point at, even though he claims to have not done anything wrong when it comes to the VW scandal. And we don't know if that's true or not. I mean, he could be totally truthful, and we don't know. The investigation's not over yet. If there's a trial, then we can say definitively he's guilty or he's not guilty. But because there has not been a trial, these are all allegations, and really nothing has been proven at this point. So that's fine. We can continue on from there. We'll leave Winterkorn out of the equation for now, because really he's not playing a huge factor in this. If he knew about it and then didn't say something about it, okay, I could see that. But still, there's not really a whole lot of reason to point the finger at the former CEO of Volkswagen yet. Well, last Monday, the new CEO of Volkswagen, Matthias Müller, told a group of about 1,000 managers at Volkswagen headquarters that the company had a plan to refit vehicles involved in the company's recent emissions scandal. According to the Wall Street Journal, Mueller said that a special team spent the weekend coming up with a comprehensive action plan to deal with the fallout from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's discovery that Volkswagen Group had been fitting its diesel vehicles with software to game emissions testing. The software would fully engage the emissions control system during lab tests, and it would reduce the effectiveness of the system when the car was actually operating under normal driving conditions, spewing nitrogen oxide levels at far above federal limits in the U.S., according to the allegations. Now, again, does that actually make a huge difference? Possibly not. Not environmentally. That's kind of the weird thing, because you have to think about scale, right? Where we as individuals put out quite a bit of, say, CO2 emissions when we're breathing. Our cars put out quite a lot of, well, more emissions, carbon emissions when we're driving. Diesel engines are actually cleaner, is the funny thing. Diesel engines are significantly cleaner than gasoline engines, which is a little bit funny, but that is actually the case. So really, does it make a whole lot of difference considering all the different things which put out huge amounts of emissions? Again, you have these diesel trains, and you've got the diesel electric ships which travel across the ocean every day, shipping goods from China to here, and from here to the UK, and from Europe over to the United States and Canada and to Mexico and Central America. All these different ships constantly traveling over in Somalia, getting pirated by by guys wearing T-shirts on their heads and waving around dirty old AK-74s. You know, we see that all the time. And these ships are putting out huge amounts of emissions. So nobody's really worrying about that. At least that's not really being pushed in the media. But this VW thing is, again, to me anyway, the issue is not the emissions, because I'm really not too worried about that. The issue is, did VW lie to the government? If that turns out to be true, that is a big problem, because, again, a corporation has to answer to government. I wish that wasn't the case, but it is. It's not the same way as individuals. Corporations are not quite the same thing as individuals. The rights are a little bit different. But for the most part, a corporation is really answering to the government at pretty much any time on a whim. Even if it is a foreign company like Volkswagen happens to be, it's based in the European Union in Germany, of course. It's an old German company founded in the, I believe, 30s. We don't need to get into that, though. We all know what time period that was for Germany, but that's not really important to this. So it's an old German company, and yet existing partially in the United States, and thus is at least a little bit liable if there are damages caused within the United States. That's really, I'm not an apologist for the government at all. But if there are damages caused by a company within the United States by a foreign company, it is actually the responsibility of the government to make sure that that is set straight. So actually, for the first time in a long time, I'm defending the feds here. They're actually kind of doing their job, which is kind of weird, actually. It's rare to see. So Volkswagen CEO, again, that's Matthias Mueller now. Winterkorn is out of the question. Volkswagen's new CEO did not detail what these technical fixes would actually be that they're proposing. Originally, the EPA implicated more than 480,000 diesel vehicles within the United States, but Volkswagen later admitted to over 11 million vehicles worldwide that carry software to hinder the emissions control system. According to the Wall Street Journal, Mueller said on Monday that the software was not activated in all 11 million vehicles. What was the goal here? I mean, really, what's the purpose of this? If the software, we assume the software would actually work if told to work. So why would you disable it? To give the users a better experience in driving? I don't understand the purpose in doing this, really. This week, German authorities opened an investigation into possible fraud at Volkswagen after claims resurfaced that a parts supplier for the company warned it back in 2007, allegedly, of course, not to sell cars with the problematic software. Today, Volkswagen will meet with the European Union's industry commissioner to explain the situation, according to a European Union spokesman. So things are not looking very good for Volkswagen. Now, the reason I'm pushing these Volkswagen stories so much is because we here locally in Chattanooga have quite a big stake in Volkswagen. So if something were to, heaven forbid, happen to Volkswagen, that would be bad for us. Really bad. So again, I'm not saying that we should not question Volkswagen, not at all. If some wrong happened, then Volkswagen needs to be held responsible for that. Never would I deny that. I'm all for accountability at every level. But if we're looking at this strictly economically, we have to realize that there actually would be pretty big economic implications if something were to happen to Volkswagen. lots of people in our area would be out of the job. I personally know 2 or 3 people at least who worked for Volkswagen. And if those people suddenly had no jobs, that's a problem. That's a really big problem. Now, I mean, again, I am all for the local economy too, and I'm sure that these people could find jobs working at a local business. Sure. But in between that time, you have potentially a breadwinner who doesn't have a job, and that's kind of a problem. That's kind of a big problem, because then without a job, you're talking about potentially a strain on the city government, because people drawing benefits, or at least the state government, people drawing benefits potentially, not that they would automatically, but that could happen. Lots of problems can pop up from something bad happening to Volkswagen, or even just downsizing and them deciding to close some plants. I mean, if the one in Chattanooga is one of those, again, that's a problem. That's a really big problem. And I don't need to tell you that. You're smart. You know that. So what's going to happen? Well, I wish I could say I knew, but right now, that's kind of in the hands of the feds. If they decide over there in some federal office to prosecute or to break up the American side of the company, which again, I think is unlikely, but could happen, that's when things start to become worrying. That's worst case scenario, though. Really, the most likely thing is the payment of fines and a massive recall, because that's what's happening now. Is one of the biggest recalls in Volkswagen history is happening right about now. Of course, Volkswagen is bleeding money, but still, if it can continue to sell enough cars to turn a profit, then there can be a recovery. It doesn't mean it's the end times for Volkswagen at all. There are lots of different things that could happen. And even so, there's always the potentiality for a buyout too. So don't think that even if Volkswagen goes under, that you'll lose your job if you work there. Because again, there's possibility of a buyout from another company. Heaven forbid it's GM, but it could happen. Then we have another car company that's getting funding from the government. So, oh boy. But again, Volkswagen kind of makes money from the government because it was sort of founded under a fascist system with National Socialism back in the 1930s. So lots of government money went into it to fund it with contracts and all that sort of thing, because it was literally meant to be the people's car in a very socialistic sense. But again, we don't need to get into that because those days are long gone. You know, it's funny too. I was seeing people posting on Facebook that you should not buy Volkswagen cars because it was the first Volkswagen was literally designed by Hitler. That's just silly. That's like saying you shouldn't buy Fanta because the Coca-Cola company designed it to be sold within Nazi Germany. You know, who cares, man? What year is it? It's 2015. It's not 1938 anymore. We really don't need to bother with that sort of thing, because if there are still any Nazis, they're like 90 years old and they're probably not going to try to shoot you with a Kar 98. So I wouldn't worry about it, to be quite frank, or a Mauser or whatever weapon they would use, STG 44 or maybe an MP40. They'll mount a they'll mount an MP40 onto their truck and they'll gun you down. I kind of don't think so. Nazis are not something to worry about these days. So buying something from a company which may have been founded back in the 1930s during Nazi occupation of Germany is really not something to worry about. If that were the case, we should never buy IBM products and we should never buy Coca-Cola products. In fact, you should never buy a Ford, because Henry Ford may or may not have been allegedly a Nazi sympathizer and possibly slightly anti-Semitic himself. That really doesn't matter these days, though. So, I don't know. People like to spew stuff on Facebook, though. That's just how it is. Hey, by the way, speaking of Facebook, have you seen that funny I don't know if it's a scam, because there's not really anyone making any money off of it as far as I know, but a hoax, I guess. People saying that you had to pay £5.99 in cross the pond dollars, in Britbong dollars, the Caliphate of the United Kingdom dollars, to get a privacy setting on your Facebook account. How silly is that, right? Because Facebook is free. Do you know why Facebook is free? Because we're the products. No, I'm not kidding. Facebook is free because we are the products. Facebook would probably actually cost money if it weren't for that fact. If Facebook were ad-free, it wouldn't cost anything. But Facebook is the best ad-selling platform in a long time. That's the thing. Facebook is an ad company. Saying it's a social networking company is missing half the equation. It's an ad company, much like Google is an ad company. Google's not a search engine company. Google is an ad company. Full-on Mad Men, cigarettes, and a three-piece suit sitting in your office with champagne. It's an ad company. That's what it is. Facebook is the same thing. It's one of the best ad platforms ever. People trust their personal information to it on an unprecedented level. They'll put where they went to high school, where they grew up, where they currently work, what their target demographic is, because you're 18 to 35. You're putting in all the information that a person who sells ads could ever want to know. They can sell the best targeted ads ever to you on Facebook. If you post about how you broke your phone, you're going to see an ad for Samsung popping up in the sidebar. Facebook is an ad company. You're not going to pay for Facebook anytime soon, unless Facebook goes under and they get desperate, but that's unlikely. It's not like Netflix where you don't see ads because you're paying money for it. And Netflix is actually doing better than cable companies too, which is kind of funny. But no, Facebook is free because you are the product. You don't have to pay £5.99 for security settings because you're never going to be private on Facebook anyway. This is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a bit more right here. Hot News Talk Radio AM 1240 and hotnewstalkradio.com. Also on the TuneIn Radio app for your smartphone. That's Hot News Talk Radio and hotnewstalkradio.com.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode. What kind of fool do you think I am? Just think I know nothing of
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Sky Aerial Services uses advanced drone technology to give you a better perspective and depth of your property and project. We offer aerial photography and video for your business, farm, home, or advertising campaigns, as well as editing services to complete the experience. Call us at 423-521-0284 and see how we can help you tell your story about your business, property, or project. We work with real estate professionals, both commercial and residential, developers, engineer inspectors, surveyors, ad agencies, auto and boat dealers, mapping services, insurance inspectors, corporate marketing, charity events, weddings, and photographers. Our consultation is free. Call 423-521-0284. That's 423-521-0284, or visit our website, skyaerialservices.com. Sky Aerial Services. The sky is our limit.
Here you are, working to keep your customers happy and to manage your cash flow. IRS problems are the last thing you need, but here they are, flapping about you like vultures. Get help from Eric Pelton and his team of accountants at E.J. Pelton Company. Audits, letters, proposed return changes, 1099s, penalty threats. Pelton Tax Resolution Services brings peace of mind and helps you keep more of what you've earned. EJPelton.com. Offices on Brainerd Road and in Soddy Daisy, just north of the Bilobe. That's E.J. Pelton. Call 622-3156. Think ahead, 622-3156.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Soddy Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection, loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Soddy Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Soddy, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Costa, host of the Costa Report, every Sunday at 9 a.m. My guest this week was the former Secretary of Education, Mr. William Bennett, whose controversial new book titled America the Strong is getting ready to hit bookstores this month. Don't miss a thought-provoking one-on-one conversation with William Bennett this Sunday at 9 a.m. on the Costa Report, right here on AM 1240, Hot News Talk Radio.
This is America Now with Meghan McCain.
Al Gore running is crazy. You're flying around in your private jet all over the world, and you want average Americans to care about the environment. Don't you think you should be doing your part as well?
Meghan McCain, weekdays at 7 p.m.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Hi, I'm David Tulis, inviting you to make the move with me 9 to 11 a.m. weekdays here at AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. The David Tulis Show, featuring Nooganomics.com for Chattanooga and beyond. 9 to 11 a.m.
Fox News Radio. I'm Lillian Wu. Russia asking the U.S. to stay out of Syrian airspace as Moscow carries out airstrikes presumably aimed at ISIS. However,
there are no ISIS targets in the Homs and Hama area, and that's where those Russian airstrikes took place today. We're already seeing some images of children being dragged out of rubble in those areas. That is the area where the Free Syrian Opposition, Free Syrian Army is based.
Fox's Jennifer Griffin. Moscow supports Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad, while Washington does not. Cleared by the Senate, a measure to keep paying the bills in the nation's capital.
A short-term spending bill to fund the government through December 11th. The House should do the same later today, getting it to the president's desk shortly thereafter.
Fox Radio's Jared Halpern. And a federal appeals court upholding a ruling against the NCAA, saying its use of college athletes' names, images, and likenesses violate antitrust laws. Fox News, we report, you decide.
News Talk 1240.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
You would be correct in your assumptions if you assumed that I'm not a very big fan of the feds. You would be absolutely right if you thought that about me. And actually, I would congratulate you for being so observant. Yes, it's true. I don't like the feds, but my reasoning is not really so animalistic, perhaps, as some people. Some people don't like the feds because they're saying, like, oh, they're trying to take my guns away and all these sorts of things. Well, I know that they can't take my guns away, so I'm not too worried about that. No, my main concern really is the privacy angle. That's the big thing for me. Property and privacy are two of the things that I value most when we're talking about this plane, I should say, this plane of existence. In this realm, property and privacy are two things which I value very greatly. And of course, the spiritual realm is a totally different thing. But privacy and property are two things which actually our country is sort of almost based upon, actually. These two rights are very well covered within the Constitution, property rights and privacy rights. Now, privacy rights are very easy to find in the Constitution. It's actually right there on the Fourth Amendment. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So, meaning that if there is a seizure, as an example, there has to be an affidavit showing that this is in fact what we want. This is what we're trying to get after, and this is all the, it's very, there's a process behind it, and there are provisions for that within law enforcement. There are also provisions for a well done, we'll say, seizure and search. It's not like there can never be a search or seizure. It's just that it's a very rare occasion where that would be pulled off in a good way. We'll put it that way, in a privacy-minded way. That doesn't really happen very often, though, is the funny thing. Where really, a lot of the time, we see people's privacy rights being violated all the time, and nobody says anything about it because they say, well, he didn't have anything to hide. He might have been a terrorist, so whatever. People are constantly buying into the federal rhetoric, and it's really a shame that people constantly buy into the federal rhetoric, because possibly they don't understand the implications of buying into it. That might be it. But sometimes people are just buying into it because it's the easy way out. It's the easy thing to do, to just go with whatever the official story might be. And I'm not just talking about official stories when it comes to governmental things either. Corporations certainly lie. Individuals lie all the time. It's human nature to lie. In fact, it's human nature to be pretty dang awful anyway. Well, now the Justice Department is set to argue, according to Ars Technica on Wednesday, before a federal appeals court, that it might prosecute people for crimes based on evidence obtained from their computers, evidence which was outside of the scope of the original probable cause search warrant. Now, again, it's a search warrant based on probable cause, so that's the only search warrant that's valid here. So anything outside of that scope is not admissible if it was obtained without a warrant, thus obtained illegally. So what's their argument here? Not a really good one anyway. This is kind of a big deal in today's digital age. Society has evolved to the point that many people keep all of their papers and effects commingled on our computer hard drives. Certainly that's the case with a lot of us. Think about it this way. if you have a account at a major bank, let's use SunTrust as an example, just as an example, because I have experience with SunTrust. Okay, you've experienced a odd sort of occurrence with your phone or with your card where it was declined, and you know you have money. So you check your phone and you use your SunTrust app, and you see that you do in fact have money in your account. There's no problem there. You have money in your bank account. So what's the deal here? Well, things get sorted out. It turns out the bank just blocked your card because they thought it had been stolen over there, and everything's hunky-dory. Now, what did you just do? You looked at your bank account on your phone. That's very sensitive information. Now, I'm not going to say that, oh, you looked at your bank account information on your phone. Obviously, you don't understand privacy, yada, yada. No, it's not like that. But there is something to be said about a lack of thinking, perhaps, about privacy in today's modern culture, because it's so easy and so convenient to just ignore privacy because it's the most convenient thing. And I'm not necessarily saying that in an accusatory way, because I'm certainly guilty of that too. I have a Facebook account. I've got a Twitter account, Imager and LinkedIn and all these different Reddit, whatever, all these different accounts. We all have them. Probably anyway. Most people have social media accounts. In fact, here at the station, at the office, we have a social media account, Hot News Talk Radio on Twitter, where you report the world of science. In fact, we've got quite a few different notifications of people retweeting us and favoriting our tweets and tweeting at us and all sorts of different things. So yeah, how interesting. In fact, we have this guy, Billy the Impaler, tweeted at us on Twitter. So if you are Billy the Impaler, shouts out to you, because number one, you had a pretty good statement, and number two, that's a pretty cool name. So shouts to Billy the Impaler on Twitter. What he's impaling, I'm not sure if I want to know, but hey, Billy the Impaler on Twitter. Shouts to you and props, and go follow Billy the Impaler if you want to on Twitter. So we have a Twitter account. I have one personally. You can search my name and you'll find it. It's just something that we do today. Throwing privacy out the window is just something that is encouraged, even if perhaps we don't realize exactly what we're doing when we do that. Because say we sign up for a Facebook account, everyone's done it. I did it back in like 2007 when it was cool and hip to do, and I didn't think about it because I was like 12. I didn't think about signing up for a Facebook account, and I didn't think, well, there goes all my privacy right out the window. Most people don't really think about that because, again, like I was saying before this segment, Facebook is an ad company. Pure and simple. Facebook is an ad company. It's not really a social networking company. That's secondary. That's a function of it. It's an ad company, and we are the products. It sells information to ad companies from people like you and I, you and me. Us people here, we the people here on Facebook, we get our information sold to ad companies. And I'm not really condemning that because that's their business model and it works and it makes a lot of money and it's a great platform. It works. I'm not going to say it's terrible, but it does work and we all consent to it. We sign a terms of use agreement. We're all in this boat together is basically what I'm saying here. So we can't really condemn that, but we also have to recognize what's going on here because this is kind of important. And as this progresses, as time goes by, people are less likely to think about privacy moving forward, which is a phrase I hate, by the way, moving forward. People like to throw that one around. Oh man. It's kind of like deeply concerned. Oh man, deeply concerned is one of those corporate phrases that you hear so much. I hate it so much. We are deeply concerned and we are looking at new solutions and yada yada and highly nuanced legal disputes. Initially, this particular one seems innocent enough. It concerns an accountant's tax evasion conviction and a 2-year prison sentence in 2012 that was based on court-authorized searches for images of his computer or on his computer. And actually, they took image files from his computer hard drive, meaning that they converted his hard drive into an indexed image file, meaning that it could be mounted on a regular PC as if it were a hard drive. They create a virtual hard drive image. You get what I'm saying. They copied his hard drive. But anyway, so that seems innocent enough. It's a legal thing. They got a warrant, and that shouldn't really be a problem. Except, wait a minute. Stavros Ganias's files were copied as part of an Army overbilling investigation into one of his clients, holding on to the image files for nearly 3 years Connecticut authorities discovered fresh evidence unrelated to the initial search of the files and got a new search warrant to investigate more of that accountant's mirrored files, which were already in the government's possession, I should say. All the while, Gneas had subsequently deleted those files from his hard drives after the government had imaged them, according to court records. So essentially, those files were not in existence anymore on his computer, but the government had copies of those files on the image which they had taken of his hard drive before. Why you would keep the same machine after a federal investigation, I don't know. If the feds came in and took my computer and then gave it back to me, I would burn that computer and buy a new one, because no way am I going to use the same machine which the feds just gave me. That's asking for trouble. Who knows what bugs they put on that? No way, man. So the case asks how long the government can retain somebody's computer files which are unrelated to the court warrant, at least the initial court warrant. They did get another one, but these files are unrelated to the first warrant. So again, sort of sticky situation. The accountant's lawyers said that once the government got what it needed regarding the accountant's client, the remainder of Gneas' files should have been purged. Federal prosecutors disagreed and said that they retained the imaged files for numerous reasons, including the authentication purposes and to allow the government to comply with its discovery obligations imposed by the Constitution. Where in the Constitution does it say that they have to retain files for 3 days or more? Or 3 years or more in this guy's case. Also, why does he still have the same machine after 3 years? Is this like a server mainframe that's really expensive to replace? Or is it like a MacBook Pro that costs maybe $1,000 to get a new one? I mean, come on, man. If you're working with government contracts, surely you've got enough cash to buy yourself a new computer. So my tip to you, dear listener, if the feds take your computer and give it back to you at some point, don't even power it on. I'm serious. Don't even. Throw it out. Chuck it right out. Buy a new computer. It's not worth it. What they say in the movie Alien, nuke it from orbit. It's the only way. It's the only way to be sure. And that's exactly what you should do if the feds take your computer. Nuke it from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. If the government were to delete data or only maintain small portions of government data that it seized, it could be accused of destroying exculpatory evidence. Not sure what that's supposed to mean, the government said. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals in a legal filing said that ahead of Wednesday's oral arguments. Retaining the entire data set, the government said that it allows the government to conduct reasonable searches of the images for material responsive to the warrant as the case evolves. I also think it's really funny how the government determines what is reasonable. They say, well, this is a reasonable search because we say so. Hey, reasonable search. We said so. The government said it began investigating the accountant for tax evasion without actually reading the image files allegedly associated with those tax issues. The government said it suspected that files associated with the alleged malfeasance were commingled in the image files. So the authorities got fresh court authorization to dig deeper into the image files, the government said in court papers. So this is a very sticky wicket for this alleged criminal, this accountant, this defendant, I should say. That's the word I'm digging for. I'm digging deep into my brain to try to find words. Defendant is the one that I managed to pull out. Defendant. Yes, this is a bad situation for him. Now, again, he's accused of doing some pretty shady stuff, price gouging and potentially overbilling governments. That's kind of bad, especially since we're kind of paying for that, but never minding the fact that government makes most of its money off of tariffs and such, but oh well. So it's a really kind of it's sticky, man, because on the one hand, that's not good to do, but on the other hand, he has rights just like you or I, so what do you do? Well, you're innocent until proven guilty. That's what you do. Is he been convicted? I don't know. They didn't actually mention that. If he hasn't been convicted, then he is presumed to be innocent. And that being the case, you have to get a warrant for each and every new instance of information that you want. And it's particularly describing the places to be searched or the person's papers, effects, whatever, to be seized. So you have to particularly describe precisely what you're getting. You can't just say, I'm looking for a marijuana in this guy's house. And they go in, and they don't find marijuana, but they do find pirated copies of Don't Mess with the Zohan. That's not really pertaining to the warrant, which they already got, so you have to get a new warrant for that to go in and get that information or that particular copy. And if he destroys it before you can get to it, and you can't prove that he ever had it in the first place, well, that's kind of your problem, not his. So there's a lot of protections in the Constitution, even for people who the government might think is guilty of committing a crime. And that's kind of the fun thing of it, is that there are a lot of protections in the Constitution, and sometimes they don't always work in our favor. But you know what? That's a trade-off, because it was designed for a pretty free society. Even with a lot of people who we would consider today to be criminals, get away with quite a lot. Now, of course, the founders probably wouldn't care if you had weed in your house. They probably also wouldn't really care if you had pirated copies of movies in your house. Things have changed quite a bit since they've been around, unfortunately. You know, patent law has changed a lot. Copyright law has come into existence since they were around. You know, patents were only originally supposed to last like 2 years, and then it would go into public domain. Same goes for copyrights. So basically the idea of patents was you would get an exclusivity period. That's what the patent thing was for, where you would patent something. You got an exclusivity period to recoup your losses for R&D to develop this object, and you alone could sell this object for a set period of time. Then your patent expired and went into public domain, and anyone could make even precise copies of what you had just made. That's changed a lot over the last few years, by the way. That's changed a whole heck of a lot. Same goes for copyrights. Copyrights were only supposed to last like 7 years. So then after that period of time, your film, of course, film wasn't around back then, but you get the idea. Your film, your book, your manuscripts, your papers, your poems, what have you, would go into public domain. Well, the idea here is that information should be free. Pretty simple concept. Information kind of needs to be free. Lots of very influential people seem to believe that, Edward Snowden being one of them, Julian Assange, Bradley Manning I apologize, not to dead name, but Chelsea Manning seems to believe that, at least to some extent. So we're seeing that kind of a lot in very intellectual circles, I guess, that information should be free. So who am I to argue, I guess, with people who are much smarter than I am? Twitter. Lots of controversial news coming out about Twitter. I don't know how I feel about this one. Twitter is looking at possibly expanding the 140 character limit. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to do about that, because the 140 character limit was like the cornerstone of Twitter, and still is. It's not gone away yet. It's like the cornerstone of Twitter. If it goes away, it's kind of all over. So, but we can rest assured, because this is only for direct messages. Not to spook you, but this could be a step in the wrong direction. If the 140 character limit goes away for direct messages, who's to say that the tweets themselves aren't going to be next? Twitter's 140 character limit is going away, at least for the private messages which you would send from your device on that service. As promised, the company said today that it will now allow messages of up to 10,000 characters on its mobile apps, its desktop apps, and on the web. It will also work with third-party apps such as Tweetbot or TweetDeck, or whichever one you're using. It's the number one request that we get from folks, says Session Agarwal, product manager. He's the product manager for the direct messages, which is funny because I never thought of direct messages as actually a separate product. The only time I ever get direct messages is from an advertiser telling me that I should buy some testosterone supplement, which I really don't need to do, being a growing young man. But anyway, so they want to be able to say what's on their mind and be themselves in direct messages, whereas I guess on the main Twitter side with the 140 characters, you really just can't be yourself, man. After neglecting the feature for years, Twitter began rolling out improvements to direct messages when Kevin Weil took over the product organization last fall. The company restored the ability to send links, added group and photo messaging, and even began letting you share tweets natively inside of those messages. The idea, Agarwal says, is to make DMs the place where you talk about the stuff that you see on Twitter. We want to make sure that you can really fluidly move between public and private, he says. Among other things, removing the 140 character cap on messages makes it easier for businesses to conduct customer service over direct messages. So lots of good ideas are going into the DM character limit. But is this going to be a good move or a bad move for Twitter? Well, we can't really say for certain yet, but fortunately it being directed only at direct messages means that not going to see a whole lot of change on our side, because most of us probably don't use direct messages. This is obviously a jab at Facebook's model of really being a private messaging service more than anything, at least a lot of the time. Facebook deals quite a lot in private messaging. In fact, most people as far as I know anyway, from my own personal experience, seem to use Facebook for PMing more than anything. Facebook has kind of replaced the instant messenger in a lot of ways. People moved over from MSN over to Facebook, and it was really kind of seamless. Or if you were like me, you moved over from IRC into Facebook. And still, I use IRC relatively regularly. I guess I should use it more, really. I just haven't gone around to it, I guess. I don't know. I should be on IRC more often. I'm just not, because I don't know. I need to get back into the swing of it, because IRC was a lot of fun. I have a lot of good memories on Internet Relay Chat. I need to get back into the swing of things on there, but oh well. Over the years, Twitter has explored releasing a standalone messaging app built on direct messages, a la Facebook Messenger. The writer of the article asked Agarwal how he thought about that question today. He wouldn't say anything about unreleased products, understandably, but suggested that direct messages functioned best as a kind of back channel for Twitter. So would this work as a separate platform for Twitter, having a direct messaging app separate from the main Twitter app? I probably wouldn't use it. I'm not going to lie, because the people I follow on Twitter are not the people who I'm friends with on Facebook. Generally speaking, I'm not friends on Facebook with people who I'm following on Twitter. The two don't really commingle. People I interact with on Twitter are usually people who are not acting as characters, but they're more just funny people, I guess. Twitter comedians, amateur comedians on Twitter, news sources. I use Twitter for news probably more than I use it for anything. And it's sort of funny how that's working out, because not only am I personally using it for news, I use it for news even professionally too, because it's a great way to just curate all the different news sources into one place, aside from the other sources which I curate from and I use to study what's going on around the world. You know, ChattanoogaHeadlines.com is a great way to see things locally, but I also have a list on Twitter that I use to get news sources from Twitter. So I got like AP and Reuters and all sorts of different sources pouring in that I use just personally, separate from their professional use. So Twitter's a great news source. It's sort of like a aggregate, kind of like Google News is, except a little bit better because it's more instantaneous. With Google News, you have to wait for an article to be written. With Twitter, you really don't have to wait for that because, again, 140 characters. All you got to do is punch it in, and there you go. You basically have a news story in 140 characters. It's a headline each time. Much more gripping than a big wordy thing. It's actually, Twitter kind of translates over really well to radio, is the funny thing. You could probably seriously do a radio show of just reading tweets, and it would probably work because the tweets are really well packaged. It's an individual bite-sized package of information. It's just there when you need it. And it's kind of great. So I guess Twitter has the digital drive seal of approval. It took long enough, right? So the writer of the article says, I wonder if that isn't thinking too small, though, with an individual app for Twitter direct messaging. A lightweight messenger app could open up new possibilities for the company, just as it has for Facebook and the Asian mega messengers. So perhaps that will come down the road. But in the meantime, you do have a 10,000 character box to fill on Twitter's direct messages. So Twitter has changed not really a whole lot. That's good, though. Twitter hasn't changed really much at all since the beginning. Fun fact, Twitter did not have hashtags when it first started out. Hashtags were actually invented by a guy who didn't even work for Twitter at the time. He just suggested it. And the hashtag is kind of a new thing, actually. It's both new and old. The symbol is very old. It's an old typographical thing. The official name is the Octothorpe. Fun bit of trivia for you. The hashtag's real name is the Octothorpe. And if you grew up using phones like I did, then you call it the pound sign. And sometimes I still catch myself calling the hashtag the pound sign because I am an old soul. This is Digital Drive here on Hot News Talk Radio AM 1240. Hey, check out the Hot News Cam on YouTube. Just search for Hot News Talk Radio on YouTube. Clutch with Keon Rose is coming up next year on Hot News Talk Radio. He is our resident sports expert. He's going to be talking about all the sportsy things. You know, I think he's a sports expert because I know so little about sports that I just sort of assume he knows what he's talking about. So maybe he's really bad at it. Well, listen and find out here on Hot News Talk Radio AM 1240 and hotnewstalkradio.com.
This is a mob world. This is the mob world.